The airplane soared smoothly through the vast blue sky, engines humming with a steady rhythm that lulled most passengers into comfort. Some were dozing off with neck pillows tucked beneath their chins, others scrolled lazily through their phones or chatted softly with the person beside them. In the middle rows, unnoticed by nearly everyone, sat a quiet teenage girl in row 17. She had her headphones in, sketching little shapes and figures on a worn-out notebook balanced on her lap. Her presence was calm, almost invisible, like the hum of the engines that surrounded them. Flight attendants moved down the aisles with practiced smiles, offering drinks, adjusting blankets, answering questions. Families laughed together, business travelers typed hurriedly on laptops, and for a brief moment, life inside that plane felt like a world sealed off from worries below. It was ordinary, predictable, even safe. Then, without warning, a strange flicker ran through the cabin lights. A low groan echoed from deep within the engines, like the sound of a giant sighing in pain. A second later, the steady hum that had been the backdrop of comfort vanished completely. The silence was sudden, sharp, and chilling, pressing down on the passengers before panic had time to bloom. The plane seemed to hang, suspended in the vast sky, as if time itself had frozen. Eyes darted, whispers rose, and hearts quickened. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the ordinary flight had just become extraordinary in the most terrifying way. The sudden drop in sound left a hollow ringing in everyone's ears, and then chaos erupted. A violent shudder ran through the plane, rattling trays, spilling drinks, and jolting passengers against their seats. Overhead compartments shook as oxygen masks tumbled down with a hiss, swinging wildly like pendulums. Panic rose instantly. Mothers fumbled to strap masks onto crying children, couples clutched one another, and strangers reached out instinctively, finding comfort in a hand they had never held before. The turbulence grew harsher, every jolt reminding them of their helplessness. Amid the noise, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, strained and trembling. His words were broken, but clear enough to send a shiver through every soul. The plane had lost all power. Gasps and cries filled the cabin. A man in the back began to pray aloud, and soon his voice was joined by others, whispers of faith and desperation blending into a chorus of fear. Flight attendants struggled to maintain order, shouting instructions over the roar of panic, but their own pale faces betrayed the dread they tried to hide. Some passengers squeezed their eyes shut, unable to look at the terrified faces around them, while others stared out the windows at the endless sky, as if searching for hope in the horizon. It felt as if the entire plane had become a single beating heart, pounding with fear, every passenger bound together in a moment of pure uncertainty. The ordinary journey had turned into a fight for survival in the middle of the chaos, while voices cracked with fear and the cabin filled with the sound of sobs. A movement from row 17 went almost unnoticed. The quiet girl who had spent the flight sketching slowly removed her headphones and stood. At first, no one paid her much attention. She was small, slight, and looked no older than 17. But then her voice, soft yet surprisingly steady, cut through the noise. I can help," she said, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Heads turned toward her, disbelief flashing in the eyes of passengers and crew alike. How could this shy teenager possibly help in a situation like this? A man scoffed under his breath, and a woman shook her head as if to dismiss her words, but the girl didn't back down. She swallowed hard and spoke again, louder this time. "My dad's a flight instructor. I've been flying with him since I was little. I've spent years on simulators. I know what to do." The cabin grew quiet, the desperation in the air colliding with a fragile thread of hope. The captain, pale and visibly shaken, exchanged a long glance with the co-pilot, whose arm was bandaged from turbulence impact. It was madness, but it was also their only chance. With a nod, he gestured her forward. The girl's heart pounded, fear clawing at her chest, yet her feet carried her toward the cockpit. Passengers parted silently as she passed, their wide, tearful eyes fixed on the unlikeliest of saviors. She slid into the cockpit seat, her hands trembling as they wrapped around the unfamiliar controls. The panels around her flickered with warning lights, alarms blaring in a chorus that could shatter anyone's focus. For a moment, fear threatened to drown her. She was just a girl who had only ever flown simulators, and now the lives of hundreds pressed on her shoulders. She closed her eyes briefly, hearing her father's calm voice echo in her memory, "Breathe. Trust the plane. Trust yourself." When she opened them, her gaze sharpened with determination. The co-pilot, still shaken but able to speak, gave her quick instructions. She nodded, adjusting switches with a confidence that surprised even him. The nose of the plane dipped violently, and screams echoed from the cabin behind, but she pulled gently, fighting the weight of gravity with everything she had. Each second felt like an eternity, her heart racing faster than the alarms. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her grip held steady. Slowly, the aircraft began to respond, leveling from its deadly plunge. The cabin grew quieter, passengers sensing the shift, clinging to the fragile hope blooming in the air. With every correction, the impossible seemed closer to possible. The girl who had always sat unnoticed in silence was now guiding a powerless jet with courage stronger than fear. For the first time since the crisis began, the thought flickered through every mind on board: maybe, just maybe, they would survive. The ground drew nearer, a blur of fields and open stretches racing up to meet them. The girl's hands stayed locked on the controls, her breath sharp and steady as the co-pilot called out final instructions. Every passenger held their breath, gripping armrests, clutching loved ones, praying silently. The plane shuddered as its wheels scraped against a rough strip of land, bouncing hard before grinding down with a deafening screech. For one terrifying second it seemed the jet might tip, but then, miraculously, it steadied. A rough, uneven stop jolted everyone forward, and then silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the cabin erupted with sobs of relief, cheers, and cries that filled the air with gratitude. Strangers hugged each other as if they had always been family, tears streaming down faces that only minutes before had been twisted with fear. In the cockpit, the girl sat frozen, chest heaving, hands still gripping the yoke until the co-pilot gently touched her arm. "You did it," he whispered. She looked back, startled, almost shy, as if she herself couldn't believe it. When she finally stepped back into the cabin, passengers rose to their feet. Some applauded, others simply stared in awe, but all of them carried the same expression: reverence for the quiet teenager who had saved them. She didn't bask in the attention. Instead, she smiled softly and said, "I just did what my dad taught me." In that moment, the quiet girl in row 17 became a reminder to all: true courage can rise from the most unexpected hearts.